What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Drippin' Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Corvan, and today we have the honor of speaking with Dr. Anne Wallace. Anne is a prolific poet, writer, and advocate. We'll be diving deep into her latest poetry collection, Days of Grace and Silence, a chronicle of COVID's long haul, and exploring her remarkable journey of resilience and creativity. But before we dive in, don't forget to check out our Drippin' Creativity live stream on June 29th with over 25 creators. All are going to be there to raise money for the Trevor Project through Tiltify. Check it out on YouTube. It's going to be amazing. And don't forget to check our latest episode of Inks and Lattes every Wednesday. Like and subscribe. Let's get right into this. Anne, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Anne Wallace. I am the Poet Laureate of Jersey City, New Jersey. And I am a poet, obviously, and a writer in general, and an English professor. I also have a podcast called The Wild Story, a podcast of poetry and plants for the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. So those are a few of the things that I am. I'm also a mother. Yeah. I could go on, but yeah.
No, you definitely have a long list of achievements and successes and challenges, and you are an amazing individual. Like
Thank you.
Just going through everything and doing my little research there is like, wow, man, way too much. I'm intimidated. I'm very intimidated.
I'm also an illness advocate. I probably should have said that. A long COVID advocate. Thank you.
We were going to be coming into that one soon.
Yeah,
don't worry.
Yeah.
So I guess the best way to start is with you and going all the way back. When did you know that poetry and that sort of expression was your jam, your thing?
Interesting, because I didn't start out as a poet. In college, I studied art, and then I did a master's in women's studies and wanted to really work in the nonprofit sector and help change lives. And then realized there's not a lot you can do with a master's in women's studies. So I went back to school to get a doctorate in English. And so most of my writing then was scholarship on narratives of illness, really, of like how women in particular told their stories of mainly cancer, but other illnesses as well. And that's because I was a cancer survivor. I had cancer when I was diagnosed while I was in my final semester of college. I had ovarian cancer, and that was treated with surgery and chemo, and I never recurred or anything, so I was incredibly lucky. But that's why my focus was on how women tell these kinds of stories. But I wasn't writing my own story. I wanted to get at it by looking at what other people had done, because when I was sick, I couldn't find any stories. Mainly because most people die from ovarian cancer. At the time, I mean, it's still a very serious form of cancer. There's many survivors. I don't mean to say that if you have ovarian cancer, you won't survive. And the survival rates and the treatments have absolutely improved since I was sick with cancer. But I turned to poetry when I was diagnosed with MS, which was 12 or 13 years ago. And I was diagnosed longer than that ago, but I started writing about it through poetry about 13 years ago, because I just couldn't find another way to articulate what I was experiencing. It was so visceral and rejected narrative, really. Like I didn't know how to put that into an essay, which I would have been my go-to before that. So I started writing poems. I had these terrible medical tests called vestibular tests, where they were testing my vestibular system to see what the source of my vertigo was. And vertigo was my main MS symptom. And I say was because it's much calmer now, thankfully, which is like really lovely thing that I don't have vertigo every day the way I used to for years. But they wanted to see where that came from, whether it was from my brain or from my vestibular system, which is like the inner ear. And the way they test that is by causing vertigo. So they were blowing air in my ear. They were spinning me in a room. They had me on a platform that shifted. These are terrible, terrible tests. And it took me a long time to recover from them. So I wrote poems about them. And those were the first poems I wrote as an adult. Now, obviously I'd written poems as a kid, but I hadn't as an adult. And once I started writing those, I couldn't stop. They just poured out of me. And I've been writing poetry ever since.
That's amazing. And the whole thing, my father had bowel cancer.
Mm-hmm.
By the time he was diagnosed, it was already stage 4. So it was bowel, stomach, liver.
Right.
It was, so the entire process of going through all that, I'm very familiar with.
I'm so sorry.
Being able to find an outlet through that, I think is very impressive, because I know I've seen it. I think, do you think that with the poetry, the reason why you're kind of drawn to it more is because with poetry you have to focus the emotions and thoughts into a very specific way, so you're kind of identifying the core aspect of what you're trying to say, whereas with an essay you're actually trying to expand on it, right?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Right. In a poem I can zero in, and it can be limited in that way, but also in its limitations, in its focus, can be sort of expansive. It's a little bit of a conundrum, but and I say that knowing that also many poems, and some of the most moving poems, are ones that do more than one thing and make connections. But the thing about a poem is that the connections don't have to be so linear, right? So if I'm writing an essay, I need to have sort of a flow of thoughts that seem logical generally, especially if I'm writing it for like a public facing source, like public media. But in a poem, I can just sink into what a certain pain feels like, or what a certain metaphor or idea or image is. And I can really explore that and try to articulate it in a way that you can feel what I'm feeling. And that's sort of the beauty of it. And that's when with those poems, about those first poems I wrote about the vestibular tests, which are in my first poetry collection called Counting by Sevens. Many people said, I had no idea what vertigo felt like until I read your poems. To me, that is like high praise, right? If I can make you feel for just a moment vertigo, and then it can end at the end of the poem, and you can go back about your life. But if you can feel it for a few moments, that's what I'm aiming for with that kind of poem.
Definitely. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things that I love about poetry, is being able to, it's kind of a lot like music, with the lyrics and attaching to that, whereas it gives you a definition for something you didn't realize you needed a definition for. And then it's like, it adds clarity to something you already know. And I think it's such a lovely thing to see, and it's amazing. It definitely is. So let's talk about your new poetry collection here, Days of Grace and Silence, Chronicle of COVID's Long Haul. Let's go into where it came from, and what made you decide to really focus on this one.
Well, that means we need to go back to spring 2020, which is a period in time that nobody wants to go back to. But my older daughter became sick with COVID before everything had shut down in early March 2020, and then I became sick after that. And my first impulse when she became sick was, I need to write about this publicly, because I can't get her tested. Medical professionals say kids don't get COVID. We all know that that's false now, but at the time they really didn't think. They thought that the lining of the lungs was too smooth in kids for the spike proteins to attach to. I mean, there was a medical reason they didn't think kids got it. And I was looking at my daughter thinking, I don't think that's accurate. Or maybe it is for little kids, but she's 16 and maybe that's not true for her. So I wrote a piece for Huffington Post about the lack of availability of tests, and knowing that if this was happening in my house, it must be happening in other people's houses too. And that felt like a problem, a huge problem that nobody was talking about. So that was my first impulse, was let's write essays for a public audience. But then when I became sick, I couldn't do that anymore. I could not put paragraphs together. A paragraph, like a social media post, that was like a day's work for me. And I was still doing that, but I couldn't do more than that. And as much as I really wanted to keep writing publicly, I couldn't. So in April, which is National Poetry Month, I decided I'm going to write a poem a day, and I'm going to, just sit with what this feels like for me, what I'm observing about the world, about the pandemic in general, from my place on my couch that I couldn't get off of because I was so hypoxic. It was difficult for me to speak. It was really pretty much impossible for me to walk more than just short distances. And by short distances, I mean from one room to another. I don't mean like down the block. I mean like I was very much confined to my couch, which is where I was sort of stationed because it was right near the kitchen and I could get water or a piece of toast, or a bowl of cereal, because that was the limit for me of what I could even prepare. So I thought I'll write a poem a day, and that's what I did. And I thought, well, and that'll take me through April, and then I'll probably be better. But I wasn't better. And at the end of April, I was able to get oxygen at home. And that was a game changer for sure, but I still wasn't better. It lifted the terror of like falling asleep at night and not knowing if I'd wake up. But it didn't, I was sick really I still have symptoms. And I wasn't able to work for about 2 years. And then when I went back to work, I shouldn't have. It was too soon. I was not well. I'm a professor. So by the end of that semester, I was much worse than I was at the beginning of the semester. I took the summer to recuperate. So it's been an ongoing process, but I'm worlds better. I went for a run today. I can function, I can do my job, all of that. But your question was about this new collection. And so I've strayed. And the collection is, I wrote it as a chronicle. When I started writing it, I didn't know it was going to be a book, but I thought I wanted there to be a record of this, of what this experience has been. And so these poems in the book span 3 years. Not every day. In the beginning, it's every day. It's really intense, and the pandemic's going on. So I write about death. I write about, pandemic deaths and other things that are happening. But, and then it sort of changes over time. The poems, they become more reflective, and there's healing, there's more hope. But also, both of my daughters are long haulers as well. So that kind of comes into play, and especially at the end of the collection. So there's a lot going on in it, but it's not all about illness, even though it is. Every poem is not about I can't breathe. There are many of those, but there's a lot of other things happening in the collection too.
Definitely. So being able to take such a terrible thing happening, especially with long COVID and all of that, and being able to immortalize those moments, I think is something a lot of people just aren't capable of doing, especially when it comes to painful things and illness. It's very difficult to capture what you're feeling in the moment to reflect on later. So to be able to do that is extremely, extremely rare and amazing. You get a lot of that pain blindness after the fact, where it's like, oh, it wasn't actually as bad as it was. But when you have something that chronicles it, it's like, no, this is how bad it really was.
Yeah. And I have those moments when I read the poems and I'm like, oh my gosh, or I read my old Facebook entry posts, or other things that I wrote, especially from spring 2020. And it's shocking to me at times because, I would not remember some of the sensations and the fears and the pain and literal pain if I hadn't written it down.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful I did, honestly, like on a personal level, not on a book level, but like on a personal level, I'm glad I stuck with it.
So was there collaboration with your daughters that were going through it at the same time for this?
And the writing, no, there wasn't, but I certainly, but like, for instance, when I wrote that piece for HuffPost, I asked my daughter, my Molly, to to read it before I sent it in, because it's her story, and it was going to a very public outlet, and so she approved it. But I still, I know that then everybody at her school knew she had COVID, and she became known as the girl who had COVID, which is also now retrospectively ridiculous, because who hasn't had it? But this was before before everyone did. This was before anyone did in her school. So well, I was grateful to her for saying yes, though, honestly. And with the poems that I've written about my kids, I am grateful that they've allowed me to do that. I try to stay away from things that are too personal. Like there are things that I feel like are off limits for sure.
Definitely. So kind of veering out of that one here, let's talk about you being a professor. And so when it comes to being a poet and a professor, do you find that the way you're teaching things also reflects on how you write poetry, or the other way around? How do the two kind of coexist?
My teaching and my writing, that's interesting. It's a stumper. I mean, it definitely does. I mean, more than my writing, even though the fact of having lived through serious illnesses informs my teaching. It allows me, or reminds me, to extend empathy and grace to my students. And sometimes it's easy to forget to do that. Students missed a certain number of classes, they missed assignments, and I have to remind myself sometimes I don't have to remind myself because it's right there in my head. But other times I have to step back and remind myself that I don't know what's going on in their lives, and I don't know what their situation is unless they've told me. But why assume the worst about them? So it does affect my teaching in that regard. In terms of writing poetry, well, it's certainly being a writer affects my teaching, because I understand the writing process, and I understand how important it is, for instance, to develop habits, and also to not expect everything you write, and to know that not everything you're going to write is going to be perfect, and some of it is never going to see the light of day beyond your notepad or your computer screen. Nobody needs to see it, but it really, when you write regularly, consistently, you're developing those muscles. And yeah, some of it's going to be crap. I mean, this is true of anybody who has any kind of practice. If you're a basketball player, some days you're going to go out and you're going to practice on the court, and you're going to do your drills, and you're just not going to be feeling it, right? But do those basketball players say, oh, I can't do this, I'm never going to, whatever? No, they just get back out there the next day and do it again. And the next day it might be better, probably will be better. And when it comes game time, they're definitely going to put all those pieces together. So developing these practices and habits, that's something that definitely informs my teaching, because I can speak from my own personal, I'm not just saying do this because just trust me, do it because I know this is going to work. I know it's going to work, that the more you do it, the better, the more comfortable you're going to become as a writer, the more skilled, and as a reader. So yeah, and also that's the other thing that I try to encourage my students to become readers. And you'd think I'm an English professor, if they're English majors, they must read. Well, not all of my students read consistently or regularly, and we don't learn these skills in a vacuum. We learn from other people. I mean, we learn what we like, we learn what we don't like. So we have to get ourselves out. We have to expand our exposure to writers in order to learn new things, try new things.
Definitely. I think with the community I run there, the cafe, a lot of various writers, all of that, and one of the things that I've noticed, not just with the community but just in general through my years, is there are so many writers that don't put their first thing out because they think it's terrible. And, a lot of times it is. But at the same time, you don't learn the process. So I was talking
Yeah.
to Tamara about this on our interview,
Hmm.
where it's like, you have to do it. The only way to learn
Yeah.
how to get better is by doing it and putting it out
Yeah.
there. And I think that in itself is the most valuable lesson to tell anybody, is like, find whatever style works for you. That's fine. Do it whatever way you want. I don't personally care. Just get it out there. That's the only thing I care about you
for
doing,
sure.
more than
And
anything.
yeah, and just try. And yes, your work will be rejected. I'm in a Facebook group that's called 100 Rejections, and the goal is to have 100 rejections every year. And
I love that. I love that.
And people think that's crazy, right? Like, if you're not a writer, you think, well, what? How's that your goal? Right. But that means that 100 times you tried. And probably more than 100 times, because you probably also had some wins in there. But yeah.
That no lie, that is amazing. I absolutely. Oh, I'm so mad I never thought of that.
Yeah. It's a good model. Yeah.
It is. It's gamifying the concept of rejection.
Yeah.
And turning it into a positive. And I think that is one of the hardest things, especially for creatives, is taking those rejections and finding a way to use that to help push you forward. And you guys have done it. That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. It's not my idea. I'm not.
Oh no. No.
I'm just
for
a
sure.
member of the group, but
it's a fantastic,
isn't it? Yeah. And the other thing is, when I have students in there, I said, oh, I'm going to send this poem to this journal, my favorite journal, and it's going to be something that's just like a pie in the sky journal that they've heard of. I mean, that's why because that's why they know it, because everybody knows it. And I'll say, okay, but maybe think of some other places to send it to. For one, most places allow you to send, well, for one, don't just send one poem. Many places want you to send 5 or 3 to 5. Don't just send it to one place. Most journals allow you to do simultaneous submissions, that you can submit that same piece multiple places. You just need to let the other places know immediately if it gets accepted, to pull it, so that they're not wasting their time reviewing a poem that's no longer available. But so the 100 rejections idea is that it means you're sending it out so much that no rejection is personal. I mean, what editor would ever write a personal rejection? They don't. A personal rejection actually is a positive thing. It means that they're saying, well, we really like this, but it didn't quite fit our issue, or please submit more. But nobody writes a personally hateful response, rejection. That's not the way the literary world works. So that's another thing I try to remind writers, my students, whoever, don't take rejections personally. You have no idea why you were rejected. Usually you don't, and doesn't mean that the piece isn't good. I mean, if your piece has been rejected multiple times, maybe take a look at it again, or look at where you're submitting it. Are you submitting it to a journal that specializes in Gothic writing, and you are writing a poem about flowers? Maybe not. That's, you gotta find the right venue, but just keep trying.
Definitely. Yeah. You are helping in reiterating what Tamara and I were literally talking, because she was a magazine editor. So she was the one doing the rejections and saying how it's not personal. It's just these things don't fit. And, they're amazing. You just can't take them all. And writers don't generally think like that. It's very, I'm the worst person in the world because I got rejected.
Absolutely.
No.
Yeah, because it's your work. It means something. Yeah,
but it's being able to separate that whole business mind from the creative mind. It's like once you're sending it out, it's not it's business now.
Mm-hmm. And there will be wins, and there will be misses.
Exactly. And you know what? You learn as you go. That's kind of the whole thing. Okay, we're definitely sidetracking away from everything. But this is okay. We're doing great. So then I guess actually kind of in the same vein here, your advocacy really reaches a lot of various platforms there, from publications, media appearances, meetings with elected officials. how do you see poetry as a tool for helping raise awareness for change?
Um, well, I think in a poem, you can bring people into, I mean, I was talking about this before, bring people in so closely into an experience, into a feeling, into a pain, a physical experience, an emotional experience. And I think that matters because with long COVID in particular, because it is in many cases an invisible illness. It's not the only invisible illness for sure, but if you can't, there are a lot of people out there who say long COVID doesn't exist, or which is sort of mind-boggling to me when at any point at this point about 1 million Americans are out of work due to long COVID. So it is a mass disabling event, and there is no doubt about that. So a poem can make it real to somebody, and it also can, is it maybe to somebody who doesn't really get it, and not in, and I don't mean maliciously doesn't get it. Maybe they just don't. They don't, because not everybody understands it. But it also affirms for so many people what they're feeling. That's one thing that I've heard from a lot of people who've experienced long COVID, or their loved ones have, that the poems resonate with them and represent in some small way their experience, and it's affirming in that way, and that matters. I'm going to be speaking at a conference called Demystifying Long COVID in June. It's a medical conference, but I'll be speaking and doing a poetry reading there. And I think, like, I love that. That's exactly an audience I want to be hitting, like I want to reach. There's another hospital system in New Jersey where I live that they're probably going to, like, I'm in touch with them. We're going to be coordinating something probably for the fall with their medical providers, again, from a poetry collection. And that to me is really it, full circle, because I can do advocacy. I can get on the call with a senator or a representative. I can speak on a roundtable. I can write a piece for Huffington Post or another outlet. But if I can also reach those people through poetry, that's really meaningful to me. And because it's a different way where they can feel it, rather than just have me explain the numbers or the, you know, the financial impact of long COVID on our nation, which is immense. But it just hits on a different level.
Definitely. It's like forcing people to think outside of a box when they're in a box for a specific reason. I think it's kind of like, you know, it's impactful because it's coming at it from a different angle, and I love that. I think that's great. Okay, we're gonna slowly start wrapping it up here.
Okay.
But so first, and as we kind of segue in from that question, what do you have coming up? Do you have any more books that you're planning? You got conferences and all that stuff? You have a busy life. What's happening?
I've got things coming up. I'm promoting this book now, so if I'm available for readings and talks and things of that nature. I love doing that. But I'm also working on a memoir book, and which I've had to put like a pause on when this book came out. But now that my semester's ended, I'm raring to get back to that over the summer, work on it some more. And that is a memoir of illness, because it's really about living through long COVID, but it also is about having cancer in my 20s, being diagnosed with MS in my 30s, and living through illness again and again and again, and the different things that I've learned from each serious disease I've faced. And my approach has changed. Illness is very different for me now than it was when I was 22, and an anomaly, right? Like I got a lot of special attention when I was 21 and 22 in my oncologist's office. And I certainly don't mean to make that sound like it was a pleasant experience. It wasn't, but there's something, but there was also like, I'm struggling for words here because none of them feel quite appropriate. I want to say there was almost like a gift to being the youngest person in the office, as terrible as that sounds. But but I knew that everybody in the office knew who I was, and they were watching out for me. And if my nurse, because I had chemo at home, so I had home health care nurses, if they called the office, everybody in the office knew immediately who I was and how to support me. Because I was such an unusual case. So I've learned very different, but I know I also had a lot of luck. I didn't know to be skeptical about about anything. I just trusted my doctor completely, and that trust was placed appropriately. She deserved my trust. She was phenomenal, but I also had a lot of luck. So that's me at 22. It's very different now, 3 decades later. I know that I can't rely on luck, and I hope for it, and I can't always rely on just trust. I know the questions to ask now and the things to push for. So that's back to the memoir project. And then I'm also working on another poetry collection, trying to I have lots of poems, and I'm working to compile them into a collection to start submitting to publishers. So I'm excited to get to that this summer too.
Totally busy all the time. Multiple things on the go. I know what it's like. I love it. All right. So now we're going to do a quick rapid fire here. So take a drink.
Sure.
Center yourself. Get ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. First question. Favorite poetic form to write in?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't write many of these, but I really love the villanelle. There's got a lot of repetition to it, and that's fun.
Okay. A poet or writer who inspires you?
Ooh. Well, so many. I'm gonna give you two. One is Marilyn Hacker, because she wrote about having breast cancer in 1992, which is when I had ovarian cancer. Though I didn't know that work until later, but it really inspired me. And then on a much lighter note, Ross Gay, whose new book, The Book of More Delights, just came out recently. And he's just a phenomenal human being.
Excellent. Your go-to writing spot or ritual? You can choose either one.
I write in lots of different spots. Anywhere in my house or outside in my garden. My ritual is I usually do most of my writing late at night. So like as my day is winding down at 11 o'clock or so, that's when I frequently start my writing, which means I don't get a lot of sleep but that's when the gears are turning.
As a early bird and night owl, I understand all but too well. And that actually answered the next question right there. So then we move past that one. One word to describe your poetry style.
Oh. Oh my gosh, that is a really hard question. I was gonna say personal, but that is just like really just so generic. So I'm gonna go with afflicted, which is really maybe not exactly accurate, but
no, but you know what? It's not about accuracy. It's about just how do you, that's a perfect one. I love that word. I love it. Okay. Favorite season for writing?
Well, summer. Summer's my favorite season, and I'm not teaching in the summer. So yeah.
That's what I was gonna say, because you're not in school right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Very, very important one here. Pen and paper or digital?
Digital. I sometimes write pen and paper, and that is very productive and generative, but usually digital. Yeah, I'm more a typer than a yeah.
Me too. I have a friend of mine, and all she does is writing books, like just piles and piles, and it's like, I've forgotten how to write. I've noticed this. My writing's gone. I don't know what happened.
My handwriting's very bad now, for sure, and my hand cramps and all. It's
like
because we're just not used to it.
10 seconds in, I'm like, no, I'm done. I'm going back to where's my keyboard?
But the other thing is that I revise as I write, like constantly. It's a recursive process where I'm always going back to the line, the word before, especially with a poem, playing with spacing perhaps. And that's so hard to do on pen to paper. And I mean, you can do it, but the moving things around is so much harder. So it's a little maddening.
I don't know if you've seen it on Threads there, but I do those single post horror stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the whole goal is just to keep it under 500 characters or around 500 characters. Mm-hmm. And so it has to be digital because I'm deleting lines, moving lines, changing everything. It's like I'm taking what I originally wrote at about like 1,500 characters and reducing it down to 500. Like I couldn't do that on paper. No way.
You also can't count the characters on paper.
You know what? There is also that too.
That's a good way to really.
I'm looking at it going 526 characters, but that's including spaces. So you know what? That's good for me. I'm good.
Mm-hmm. That's really funny.
Okay, so then dream collaboration with another artist or poet.
Oh my gosh. Do we allow ourselves to dream? Well, I have to say, I do this. I feel like I'm a little bit living the dream with the podcast that I do, because it's not collaboration in a writing sense, but talking with poets and spending half an hour with them. That's the dream. But for right. That's the dream. So, for writing, I'd have to really think about that. I mean, okay, so dream, I'm just go back to Ross Gay because he's so delightful. And he's done lots of collaborative projects. So we'll go with that. But he's not the only one.
I love the concept of collabs. I'm working with another two writers on collaborative things that are outside of my normal genre, just because I want to expand, and I'm very much looking forward to getting into those. It's just juicy. It's learning new things. And And then the very final one, where can everybody find you?
Oh, well, my website is AnneWallacePhD.com. That's Anne without an E. And I'm on Instagram at AnneWallace409, in Threads as well. And I'm on Facebook, but I never remember like that. I think it's Anne.Wallace1 or something like that. But my website links to my socials. So AnneWallacePhD.com.
And they will all be down in the description below for everyone listening.
Awesome.
So I'll make sure to put all that stuff in there. Do you have any final thoughts you would like to share with everyone before we wrap it up?
Well, I will say, because you asked if I collaborate with my daughters, and I said, no, not really, but I don't think that's really entirely a fair answer. My younger daughter this is not a collaboration, but she's been creating art and writing about long COVID as well. And my older daughter collaborated with me, or worked with me on some advocacy work. We were on a panel, like a roundtable with Representative Ayanna Pressley, both of us. So a different kind of collaboration than you were asking about, but they're each doing their thing, and that's really exciting to see.
That's awesome. I love family stuff. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming, and just say goodbye to everyone.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Chris. This has really been a joy. And thank you all for listening, and see you later.
That was an amazing conversation with Dr. Anne Wallace. Her journey and insights are truly inspiring. Be sure to check out her latest poetry collection and follow her on her website so you can stay informed with everything that she's doing. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Dripping Creativity. Don't forget to mark your calendars for our Pride live event on June 29th, supporting the Trevor Project. Visit shop.creativecoffeecafe.com for our latest in merchandise. Remember to like and subscribe. And until the next time, stay creative, stay inspired. See ya.